Welcome to the Rebuilt Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Sykes. Each week, I sit down with people who have faced life's toughest challenges and come out victorious, along with mental health experts, coaches, and leaders. We explore powerful stories of transformation, faith, and practical strategies for building a life of purpose and resilience. This is the Rebuilt Podcast. What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Rebuild Podcast. My name is Jason, and I'm your host. On today's episode, I talked with a friend and personal mentor of mine, Tony Bova. Tony is not just a first responder with over 20 years of experience, but a man who has transformed his life through resilience and self-discovery. From overcoming personal challenges to finding purpose and helping others, Tony's journey is both inspiring and enlightening. We'll explore his path from the struggles of his past to the impactful work he's doing today as a men's life and business coach. He's impacting others and helping them level up in all areas of their life. So let's go check it out. Tony, what's up, brother? How are you doing, man?
Dude, I'm doing great, man. It's Saturday morning over here. Got my coffee, so things are rolling. Good weeks. Got to keep motivated.
Yeah. Well, man, I am so excited. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I've been looking forward to this because, like a lot of people that I interview, everybody's story is different, but I feel yours and mine in a way are a lot the same. And, we have a lot of the same goals and we just want to see men rise. And I just love that about you. I love what you're doing and I'm really excited to get into it. So for those that don't know you, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. I'm Tony Bova. I live in Massachusetts. I've been a first responder for the last 20 years. I can't talk too much about my current position right now because I have some things I got to keep tight right at the moment. But I've spent the last decade kind of going through what I would call like a reawakening. I've kind of rebuilt myself from the ground up, ended up going through a divorce, custody battles, and kind of got to that point actually at one point where I didn't want to be here anymore. I wanted to unalive myself. And that was a process that, if it wasn't for my kids, I don't know if I would still be here. And so that kind of brought me through going and rewiring my whole story, basically going to a Tony Robbins seminar and finally figuring out for the first time that I wasn't a victim to my circumstances, that I actually had a lot more control over becoming the creator of my own reality. Yeah. And as I started to learn that more and more, going through other iterations of toxic relationships or different situations where I didn't feel like I was actually like being myself, I started to uncover those things over and over and over again. And that brought me down this process that, you found me here on LinkedIn and, we're having this conversation. So love to dive into it.
Right on, brother. Well, hey, you mentioned that you're an EMT and first off, thanks for your service, what you do. Much respect to you. Definitely love that. But for first kind of conversation point, being an EMT, what did that expose you to that, most people never see?
Yeah, so my journey with that was I ended up getting my paramedic license, which was a lot more arduous than I expected it to be. It took about 2 years going through a lot of clinical things. And I've always been somebody that wanted to be in the middle of like chaos. And I don't know where that necessarily came from, but it was maybe one side, I wanted to really help people that were in the moment at the worst. And then the other part was, I really appreciated the adrenaline and the uncertainty of the situation. So I ended up going through the Boston EMS Academy when I lived in Boston for about a decade. And that was super eye-opening because it was one of the busiest EMS systems in the country and one of the first in the country. And so they have, we would end up handling about 12 calls per shift, which was an 8-hour shift. And that's a lot of calls for an ambulance. It's basically back to back to back if you're picking up and going to the hospital. And, I think I remember one of my first calls this is literally out of the academy, like a week. We get a call for a shooting in Dudley, which we were like 3 minutes away. We race over there, pick up this guy, throw him into the back of the ambulance. He had gotten shot in the leg. He was bleeding out of his arterial, or one of his arteries. And we got him, we responded, picked him up, and got him to the hospital in 10 minutes, which was like a remarkable time frame for EMS. Unfortunately, he did not make it. And it was like one of my first, it wasn't the first, but it was one of my first occurrences with like seeing somebody dying in front of me. And, it was just really eye opening, because that situation, it was in this inner city. There was a lot of people around. The cops hadn't even arrived yet. And, we were there in this kind of situation where we were worried that, we didn't know what the crowd was going to do. And so we just needed to get out of there as fast as possible and try to help this man. And it was just one of those moments, just like, wow, it was like a flash, almost like, did that really just happen? It felt like all the training that we had done, we didn't have time for it. I wasn't quite sure what to do because I was brand new, fresh. And it was just like this thing I fell in love with, to be able to be the person on the front line of seeing some of the most serious things that we actually, like, actual reality. It wasn't in a movie. It wasn't an imagination or a dream. Like, this is stuff that people were dealing with.
Right.
And one of the coolest things about that job is we saw the whole city. So it wasn't just, we saw every piece of the city. So we saw the poor parts of the city, and then we saw the rich parts of the city, because, we could be in the inner city at one part of the day, and then we could be up at the top of the Prudential Center, giving medical care to somebody that was at one of the richest in Boston. And so we got to see all parts of life there. And, we would, in the middle of rush hour, which would typically take you about 3 hours to get from one end of the city to another, we could get there in 10 minutes because we had the lights, the sirens, and we could actually, like, we could get through the traffic.
Yeah.
And it was just like this kind of this adrenaline high of being important and having this status that, you can't really pay to have that. You have to go through your penance to be able to, because the Boston EMS Academy was a very difficult, like, EMS academy, because you had to get, you had to be certified, and then you had to go through their 3-month academy that actually had physical standards, that had very, like, intense tests. And just to be a basic EMT, which is not like the most complicated thing in the world to do and be able to become. But it was one of those experiences that, I appreciated, the sanctity of life. And, it was a fulfilling job. It was also a brutal job, because carrying down very heavy patients downstairs in a chair stair is like, like, a lot of guys go out with back injuries.
Wow. Yeah. And so going back to like that first response that you did, I mean, that's traumatic. Um, how did that affect your mental health in the moment? Like, after that happened?
Um, what I found through my years and at being as a first responder, I found that I had a unique ability to kind of separate things. So for me, it didn't take a massive toll on me when I was, responding to these things. I was uniquely built for it.
So
And so,
compartmentalize.
yeah, it's just, I was able to be, because you can think of that and be like, oh, he's insensitive to things. And for me in particular, it was unique because I still had a lot of compassion for people during the process, but I was also able to, like, leave it there. And I know not a lot of guys were able to do that they would carry those things afterwards into their families, into their drinking, into their relationships. And I always found that my personal life was so much more, was usually the more bigger pain point than anything other than the job, because the job I felt uniquely designed for whatever. I look back at that. I didn't know that at the time. I just had a mission and a goal to be, I was pursuing law enforcement at that time as well. And that was, I was set out on that mission, and I I didn't really bring a lot of that home. Like before I was with Boston EMS, I worked at Mass General Hospital doing their police and security. And I was at the hospital when the marathon bombing went off and having to deal with a lot of
Wow.
the patients from the marathon
Oh my gosh.
bombing. And that was intense too, because I had a post during the bombing where I had to check every ambulance that came the um into the hospital. And so this was right after, I believe, the MIT police officer, I can't recall his name, but he was assassinated on MIT grounds. And so there was a massive manhunt going on, and we were checking every single ambulance, like without a firearm, checking to see if they were hiding inside the ambulance. And it was that was an interest. It was like living in a movie, is how I would describe it.
Wow. Wow. Man, what a story. So what did that season teach you about emotional control and responsibility? I mean, you were able to compartmentalize, which I think is, very fitting. I think that, depending on what you believe about faith or circumstance or, destiny, if you will, everybody's called and fits to a certain lifestyle and a certain calling, I believe, and for you, it just sounds like this is kind of your path. This is what you were built to do. This is what you were made for. But everybody learns something. And so, summing up your time in the EMT in that life, what did that teach you about emotional control and responsibility?
Yeah, I think what the biggest thing that it taught me was that you don't know what other people are going through. And so to be able to separate yourself, and that, you're not, like, if they're upset with you in that process, right? Like, people are going to be emotional. They're probably having the most difficult days of their life. And when we were showing up. And so it wasn't about us. So from a professional standpoint, for me, that was easy. Like, this isn't about me. Like, you're not mad at me. You're not frustrated with me. You're frustrated with the situation, the reality of what you're facing.
Yeah.
And so I was able to use that to kind of separate from the emotional piece, because I didn't want to be the guy that ended up on the 5 o'clock news that, did something stupid, because, I would always lean more towards, uh, being a little bit more controlled, so that that wouldn't happen. And, and I've seen, in all the jobs I've done, I've seen that other side where people were not emotionally controlled and they didn't treat people like they were humans. I always came from this standpoint, like, this is a human being. And I had good instructors throughout, like, my time as I was growing through my profession, to really hit on, like, if this was your grandmother, how would you want her to be treated? And I always approached people in that manner of, like, if this was my brother, my sister, my family member, how would I want them to be handled in this situation? Because I've been in those situations where cops or EMTs, or where, they treated people like they weren't human. And I think the baseline understanding that we are all human was such a critical piece of that. And that we're all going through our own things, especially the men and women that are doing these jobs and what they got going on at home, and being able to carry that. And that is more where a lot of the lessons that I learned kind of came from, was at the home piece, like how I had made the choices that I had made up until that point, that it got me to where I was. Because even though I really enjoyed that job, even though I enjoy the job I do now that I can't talk about, I I found that it wasn't as fulfilling as I was expecting it to be, because I worked so hard to get to where I was. And that kind of brought me into my journey later, where everything kind of fell apart, because I started to make different choices, because I thought I was victim to the choices I already made.
Oh, man, that's a powerful statement. A lot of people think that. Can you just say that again, what you said?
Yeah. So, up until that point, I believed that when, everything that was happening in my life up until that point, I had not chosen. And because I believed that, I thought I was victim to all the circumstances that were happening. So every problem, or situation that, I didn't want to happen in my life, or I didn't feel fulfilled, or I didn't feel as though, things were happening in the way that I had planned them to, that somehow that wasn't my fault. And, as I look back, especially during the time we're talking about, I wasn't aware of nearly what I'm aware of now. And I grew up in a Christian environment, and for the last 6 years of when I did go to church, I went to a Presbyterian church. And in the Presbyterian church, it's, you're a sinner, there's nothing you can do. And it was like this piece of you had no control over your own life. You were destined to always be bad. And it was like this program that I'm always going to be bad. So what is there I can do to even do anything about it? And so I lived out of that. Like, I grew up my whole life in the church, but my parents, I wouldn't say that they were very black and white and they were rigid, but what I would say is that they, in the culture of it, that was where I started to take on that black and white thinking, that like sin would overcome me, and that's something that would, it would, that I there was nothing I could do about it. And so like every time I felt guilt, shame, or something that came up, that was because there was nothing I could do about it. And so I would always experience these emotions I had no idea or understand how to shift out of. And that kind of brought me through this journey of having high expectations of myself, where I could never really fulfill them, because I also grew up dyslexic. I had ADHD. I struggled in school. I, by the grace of God, I was able to actually, like, I went to college and graduated with a 3.0, but in high school, I had D's, and I had a guidance counselor that told me, hey, you should go to trade school because you're not going to make it in college. And I was like, screw that. I'm definitely going to go to college. Like, it was like him saying that pushed me to want to show him that I could overcome that.
Right on.
And I did do that. And, so it was, but I always believed this story that, I was different, that there was nothing I could do about it, that I had not been lucky in life. I was short. I was pudgy at the time. Like, about maybe 4 years ago, I was maybe 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. And there was nothing I could do. I had no control over my own life. And as my life unraveled, that's where I started to like recognize having to be confronted of the pain of what I've been experiencing for decades. Yeah. And then that showing up, that was the thing that shifted the trajectory.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that. Before we dive in, I just want to recognize what you were talking about basically believing lies that you told yourself. You essentially chose that identity because that's what you felt you were. And so many people are just living in a false identity that they just accept it. They don't think that there's another way out. So therefore they tell themselves, this is who I am. This is what's been given to me. And this is what I have to go with. And they don't even know that there's another option. And the more they tell themselves that, the more they believe those lies. And eventually those lies become your truth, even though that's not the truth at all. I mean, that's kind of what you were saying, right? Yeah.
No, it's 100% right. Like, that's the name of the game right there, is that what I tell myself. There's this great quote by Henry Ford. And what he said is that whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And so when you start to recognize that the words that you say are spells, that the things that you say about yourself in your head, about other people, the things that come out of your mouth, they actually have the ability to shift in the trajectory of your reality. So that, when you start to, when you say, I can't do something, you're absolutely right, because in that particular moment, how could you ever possibly do anything if you say you can't do it? You've already set the limit for yourself.
Yes.
And if you can't get past that belief that, like, you can never become a millionaire if you say, well, that's not for me. Like, I don't want to be a millionaire. Well, that's, I don't believe that's true for anybody. I think everybody wants abundance. I think everybody wants extraordinary relationships. I think everybody wants to feel connected to their purpose, especially men, their mission, their purpose. And I believe that they want to be abundant with their resources. They want to have abundant relationships. They want to be good men that go out and do good things. And sometimes those good things are, being strong and being direct and being dangerous.
Mhm.
And without those things, it feels as though you're not being fulfilled. But we have this illusion of expectation of how we go about doing that. We see the goal as, oh, I want $1 million in the bank. But how do I actually build it up to get to $1 million? You have to start with the belief system. And in order to change all of that there's a process in between, because you can't just have your eyes set on the goal. You actually need to look at the belief system of why you want that in the first place. And that's what I went through, was I had my eyes set on the goal of, doing this job that was extremely intense. Not many people could do it. Like, I think a lot of, for me, was the frame of the fact that I wanted to be able to do something other people couldn't do. And then, having I was married. My marriage was, I got married quickly, but I was, we had a friendship beforehand, but I didn't have sex with her before I got married. We had having kids, and it wasn't what I expected it would be. I thought it was going to be fulfilling. It was going to fill my physical desires, and it was going to be the thing. Okay, now this is complete. This is what I was told I was supposed to do. And then in that process, I started to feel unfulfilled. And I was like, well, why? Like, why am I unfulfilled by this? But it was because of my own expectations that I created around the situation, not recognizing that I had responsibility in becoming the version of myself that needed to be able to create that type of relationship. And I was doing these things from an external perspective, believing that was going to be the thing that fulfilled us. And, when it all crashed, that's when I started to realize that, that wasn't the process. It was something going on inside of me. And that's where the story came up.
Yeah.
That's where you need to start to edit the story and create, all right, I have control over this. And then I have to start to speak this before it even happens. I have to believe something different.
Yes.
And then find what are the unselfish reasons why I want to have abundance? Well, it's because, our particular organization, me and Sabrina actually run our coaching business. Part of our piece is we're giving back. So there's this organization called Operation Rescue Children. And I was actually on the phone with them this week, and we're going to be giving a portion of our profits to them as a way of giving back, a way of being able to help other kids. And so when you have a massive amount of resources, you have the ability to give back and do good things with it.
Yes.
And it's a way that, we can, it's so interesting as this kind of like this idea came up to me over the last couple of weeks, is you can heal your inner child by giving back to other kids. That you can heal the part of you, the little boy inside of you that didn't get what he needed when you were younger, to be able to go back and give to kids that are in complete need. And as I've been building what I've been building, I want to be able to, give massive amounts of value, be able to help people shift their life, their trajectory, and what they get to experience. And on top of that, also give back to ones that are in complete need. And, when you speak about it from that perspective, well, then it makes sense to have abundance. Then you have a deeper sense of meaning that comes up for it. And it's not about, I just want a race car in my driveway, which I don't think there's anything wrong with race cars, but you're believing in something that's much bigger than who you are. And that's the thing that really drives us, I think, as men. At the core of us is this servitude, is the ability for us to serve something greater than ourselves.
Wow. Yeah. And 100%. That is all such good stuff. I say this all the time, but it's a true fact. And what I was hearing is, when you change your perspective, you can then change your reality. And it's like you were saying, it's really what you believe. You have to start with your mind first. Once you shift that focus, that mind, that ability, your limitations, as you said, that's when things really start to change. But you can't you can't rise if you set ceilings for yourself, you know? And man, I just love that. That's great. Let's go back real quick to you're talking about your first marriage, because I think
Mm.
that's if you were if I'm correct, that's kind of where things started to shift a little bit. So, can you tell us a little bit about what happened there and kind of dive into the divorce and the custody, if you will?
Yeah. No, I can, and it's funny. I think some people feel, they feel shame or they feel bad for me when I share parts of my story that I don't want to share. That was so long ago at this point that I don't even feel as though it's vulnerability at this point. I kind of built this like external life that I thought I was supposed to live. And I had gotten to this point where I was married, I had 2 kids, I'd gotten my dream job, which had taken me 10 years to get to. And I thought I like kind of climbed to the top of the mountain. I had gotten to this place where I was at the top of this mountain and I was like, oh, I I don't feel fulfilled as though I as I thought I was going to. And when I got there, I let my imagination start to kind of take over. I wasn't the intimacy with my wife at the time was not non-existent. We, had we were living in the city in Boston at the time, and I loved our apartment. Our apartment was amazing. My daughters were amazing. But I just felt like this big hole of emptiness. And it was, I thought I was going to feel more. And I've always been, I have Italian roots. I've always had a lot of emotion. I've always been kind of quite a sensitive man and always feeling things that, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to feel them or not. I think as men, we kind of bury that because, we're not supposed to feel heavily. It's not part of our design. And I disagree with that. I think that we're all supposed to feel very heavily as human beings, but the way that we process
Hmm.
that's very different. And I didn't know that at the time. And so I had been married at that point for about 8 years. I got married at 25, really young. We were the first in our friend group to get married. And as I had gone through those years, it wasn't what I expected. But we had lived from this story of like divorce is never an option. So, you can't get divorced. It's sinful. You're not supposed to do that. You just have to figure it out. And I do think, as I look back, there's pieces about like when you're committed into a relationship that you have to examine the stuff that's going on for you to be able to really bring that up and have that relationship that you want to have. You have to be a whole person. And at that time, I actually wasn't a whole person. I was filling myself with external things that I thought were going to be the thing that fulfilled me. And so at that time, I started daydreaming about having an affair. And this is the interesting thing about stories is that you can literally create your reality. And so I started dreaming. I was watching, I don't know if I've shared these details publicly, but I was actually watching the show Mad Men at the time. I was working, yeah, I
Good
was
show.
working the eve shift and I would come home and I didn't really drink that much at the time, but I'd have a beer or two and I'd watch the show and I'd watch him have these affairs and he'd have this separate life. He'd live in the city,
Yeah.
he'd have his side girl, and then
Yeah.
he would go home to his family and he'd have his family and stuff like that. And so I started to envision that because I just wasn't fulfilled. I didn't really know what was going on. And I had mentors up until that point. I always was being discipled in the church. And, I would bring this up to them like, hey, I don't know what's going on. Like this doesn't feel like it should. And the answer I always got is, no, you're doing great. You guys are talking about it. Things are great. You're doing great. And I'm like, yeah, but this doesn't make sense. And so I felt lost at the time because I had nobody to talk to about it. Never had done therapy at that point. Didn't have a good foundation of what that should be. And so what I ended up reconnecting with an old fling when I was in high school. And I wouldn't say it was a full blown affair because I literally connected with her and then left my ex-wife like within weeks. Like it wasn't even like this. It was just, I couldn't carry the guilt of like holding on to an affair at that time. So I basically I fell in love with this other woman and it was such a terrible thing to do, but I ended up telling my wife and, it was, at 2:00 in the morning after I came back from this, like I called it a retreat. Like I was going up into the mountains, and that was the intention of it. I come back and I tell her what was going on and that I was leaving, and she ended up calling the pastor. She ended up calling the elders of the church, and I had like 10 people in my house at like 3:00 in the morning. And she told me, no, you
Wow.
can't, you're not leaving me. And that started this journey where I ended up, I ran out of the apartment like a scared little boy, and ended up living with a friend for a couple of weeks, or maybe even a couple months. And I started this new relationship like back to back. And that was, it was like living in Twilight Zone, because I didn't know who I was at that time, because nobody expected this from me. I was a good kid. I was a good boy. Like I always was doing the thing. Like I was such a people pleaser. I wanted people to have a great image about me. And I didn't know what to do with that identity crisis at that time. And so I continued into this relationship. She ended up getting pregnant, and that made things like, that just added, I wouldn't even say gasoline. I would say it was jet fuel onto the fire.
So this was while you were going through the divorce?
Yeah. So my divorce was about 2 years. So it took about 2 years. And because of the religious ties, and I think because of, my ex's, the view on the black and whiteness of marriage, she was very much like, we're not getting divorced, even after I had told her that, my new girlfriend at the time was pregnant. And there was a lot of situations that I dealt with in between those two things that I can't even, that brought me into that space where I didn't want to be here anymore, where I actually, there's a whole backstory that I can't get into currently right now, but where I almost did take my own life. And because of my kids, I didn't. And because there was the pressure I was carrying at that time was so much that it completely cracked my entire identity, because my entire identity was about, following the rules and being a good kid. And that destroyed it. Like it just totally uprooted everything. And I lived in pretty much hiding for about 2 years, because I was so ashamed to even see anybody that I had seen before. I'd lost, I would say probably 70% of my friend network. I, was judged by so many different people through that process. And I look back and I'm so grateful for it, because I needed to go and shed those layers. It's so hard to tell somebody when they're going through something like that this could be one of the best things that's ever happened to you. And I truly, where I've come now, after, almost 10 years of it, I see how amazing that was, because, and from an external standpoint, like, I was finally able to lose the weight. I finally figured out, like, what I needed to do to eat healthy foods, how to move my body. I'm in my 40s now, and I'm much healthier than I was in my 20s. And, how I relate in relationships. I have an amazing relationship right now with an incredible woman. And I have, great relationships with my kids. And, I'm starting to actually be in something that, I find deep meaning and purpose, and actually helping people.
Yeah.
I found my gift. I've found my zone of genius.
Yeah.
And, look,
and you don't see it in the moment back then.
But it was all,
Did this could ever happen?
no, you can't see it, because there's so much cloud around you along the way that you can't see. You can't cut through it at that moment, especially in the pain of it. And so what I found through that process is that I needed to be very selective about who I put in to give me guidance along the way, because that was what started to help me. And that's why I believe so deeply in coaching and mentorship, in being able to be with somebody that you can trust, that's been where you've been. I see it as I've come out the other side of it, and I have hope for other guys that are going through it.
Yes.
Not because I learned it in a book or read it somewhere, or, listening to a podcast like this, but that I've actually gone through it. I've lived it. Yeah. I know what it's like. I know what it feels like to be where you're at. And, that's different than therapy in the sense.
Right. Yeah. And that's one reason why I was so excited to talk with you, is because you and I have the exact same thought process on that. That's why I started this because, I've told you a little bit about my story. I've been through some crazy
Yeah.
stuff and I've come out the other side by the grace of God and hard work and discipline and changing my identity. Not my situation, not my circumstance, but my identity, the core, who I am. I changed that and then I built on that. And it took me decades to understand that. But once I did, I'm like, this is doable, not just for me, but for other people. And they're stuck. I was stuck. Let's move them forward, and you and I both have that passion for helping other people. So right on, bro, 100%
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. It's funny. It's a funny thing to actually look at your demons and be able to look at them with such gratitude that if they had not been there, I would not be where I am today. And if more men could see that, I honestly believe that, like, what we're dealing with in society now and the cultural shifts and the view on men and the view on relationships,
Mhm.
that if more men started to understand that, if they started to step into that, then I don't think men really truly understand how much control we have over our own lives and society itself and culture, that we could actually shift. We have, if we were designed by God to be leaders, then we have the ability. Like, leadership is being able to protect and guide you along the way in a way that's safe for you, so that you start to step into the truest version of who you are. I would even take it a step back, Jason, for you, is that you didn't change your identity. You actually found the identity you were meant to live through that process, right? Your core of who you really are, the authenticity of you, that's found.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. It says, it says in the book of James, chapter 1, it says, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face
Mm,
trials, because what do they do? The testing of your faith produces perseverance." Right? And then joy comes from that. And you reach maturity. So you're gaining wisdom where you're lacking nothing. People look at the trials, they look at the fire, and they're like, I can't do this. Why does this happen to me? This is unfair. And it's like, no, brother, this is to mold you into something
mm.
greater.
What's crazy about that, Jason, is that, and we didn't talk about this yet, or maybe we won't, but I, my biggest transformation was after another breakup years later, about 3 years later, where with a woman that I truly believed, she was like, I couldn't believe I was with her, not because she was like the most beautiful woman, but it was just this connection I had not ever experienced before, and then that was the thing that transitioned me even further along in my journey. And I I look back at that with this like, being able to understand the core roots of things as they've shown up, how I've had to transition through them and be able to step into becoming an even greater version every iteration. And
Mhm.
through that process, it's been, every hurdle that comes up along the way. When I was going through that, was actually even deeper pain than when I went through my divorce. And then when I look back at that, I miss it. I miss the pain that I was in, because in the trenches of that was where the deepest sets of growth happened. And I was actually talking to
Yeah.
my dad recently about this. I don't know if you've read Napoleon Hill, but so
Yes.
Napoleon, I was listening to a talk that Napoleon Hill was given, and he was talking about the desert, when the Israelites were in the desert. And I brought this
Hmm.
different perspective to my dad, that he's been studying the Bible for, he's in his 60s. He's probably been studying it for, over 40 years. Loves, like, he was the guy that he had like 1,000 like verses memorized at one point, and he would have this box of verses
Yeah.
that he would have me, like, test him on so he could memorize them. And I brought him this perspective that, like, when the Israelites are in the desert, that the desert was actually the promised land, that inside the desert was where they were refined, because when you're lacking, you appreciate the things that show up unexpectedly. But once you're in the
Yes.
promised land, that's where, the excess of things, it plays these tricks on us, that it's like, oh, I need more. But when you're in need and you finally receive something, that's where you get to experience the gratitude and the unexpectedness of it. And so that inside the desert, you might miss the desert. That you might miss the times where you chose to overcome something you didn't think was possible to overcome, and that you did the impossible. Because in that,
Yeah.
that's where, the guys that I work with, a lot of my private clients, I talk to them about having a vision that is unattainable. Because if you have a vision that's unattainable, and if say you get close to it, you have to reset the vision before you get to it. Because when you have a vision that's ahead of you, you never get to that point where there's a cliff. And when you get to the top of the cliff, you might be like, oh no, I've reached everything I've ever wanted. Now what do I do with it? You think about guys like, I think I've heard Andrew Tate talk about this, and I'm not a big fan of him, but I think there's some truths that he has to say about men and women,
Sure.
even though I don't appreciate how he says it. But, he talks about having so much. He's like, you don't even know what to do with it. Like, I could buy everything in the world, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. Well, what is the thing that actually drives meaning? What creates meaning? The thing that creates meaning is something it's something greater than yourself, and then part of it's unattainable. It's like us moving in towards challenge and overcoming. Being challenged as a man is so significant. We always have to have a new challenge in front of us. If you're not being challenged, you're not being stretched, you're not growing, and you're dying inside. And we have a lot of guys in their basements right now playing video games, watching so much porn, drinking, smoking, doing nothing with their lives. And we need them to wake up from that. We need them to get into the woods or to do something with their lives, to do something productive.
Yep. Statistics right now show that over 70% of men between the ages of 18 and 30 are not in the workforce. The workforce is primarily dominated by men between 35 and over, and women. And it's because, well, one, mentorship, leadership. There's nobody. People stopped being the examples, and and I think a lot of it comes from who's in place now, but a lot of it comes from the last generation of parenting. Our culture has shifted. Men are not being raised into an environment where they feel important, that they feel that they are leaders, that, men are supposed to be. They don't chase after those goals, those visions. And you take a mindset that they already have like that, and then you introduce social media, video games, pornography, food, all of these addictive substances that just culture just throws out there. I mean, to be honest, it's not even their fault at some point, because they're doomed to failure from the start. They weren't set up for success. And when you were talking about how you're going through that place in your life where you're going through those trenches and you kind of miss it, a lot, that's not going to resonate with a lot of people, but I get you. I definitely get you on that. There was a time in my life. I mean, I started over so many different times, but the time that really stuck for me was I was starting over yet again in, my mid 30s, and I just started living with, or I was living with a person. I ended up having to sell my house to pay for my custody battle with the kids, and I was living in this guy's back room. And I was like, okay, I'm going to get out of this. And I lost my job, and I just signed for an apartment. And so I remember walking into this one bedroom studio apartment. I had no furniture. I had nothing. I didn't even have a job. I got the job just long enough to get the apartment. And my kids were going to sleep on a mattress on the floor. But I walked into this apartment. I just started reading this book by John Winters called Self Discipline. And I literally had that in my hand, and I had couple of bags and a few things on a truck, and that's it. And I walked in and I looked around and I was like, I said, uh, I said, this is where I'm going to grow right here. These walls, this is where I'm going to grow. And they had a little apartment gym, and that's what I did, man. I worked out. I read the Bible. I read self-discipline over and over, and I just rebuilt my life. But was it struggle? Yes, man. From the outside, it was horrible. Like mid 30s, single, one bedroom apartment, kids on a mattress, no job, no hope. But internally, looking back from that, that was my growth. That was my season. So I totally resonate with what you were saying there.
Yeah, and I know a lot of guys won't resonate with that, but the lesson in that is if they can start to change their mindset around this is my comeback story, that this is the movie I'm gonna live, that I'm gonna show the movie that's possible, and that these are the
100%,
moments
man.
that everything's gonna change. Because I think when you're first in it, you're like, how did this happen? It's a shock factor. But when the thing is that, and this is what I found through my journey, was that at some point, if this pattern keeps showing up, because it showed up for me multiple times over and over again, after relationship after relationship after relationship. And if you're finding yourself in that pattern, and this is one of the things that one of my mentors during the time was so significant. He said, where you are, there you are. And I didn't really understand it at the time. But what I've found now is that no matter whatever situation I'm in, I'm always in control of it, because I'm the one factor that's always there. So if I'm finding myself and I'm saying, "Oh, I always find these women they're toxic, they're not good for me, they ruin my life." Well, you keep picking the same women. And so at some point you have to be like, "Well, what's the primary factor that's going on right now?" And the primary factor, it's you. Like you and so when you find yourself in the pattern, then you get to see the story of the struggle, being like, all right, now I get to shift out of it. And now I'm starting to see, okay, maybe there's something I'm doing that's attracting this, or because when, if you're a man that's sensitive, you say yes to a lot of things that you don't want to say yes to. You want to please, because I think there's a deep sense of us as men. We want to serve. So like being a pleaser is not necessarily out of alignment with what our design is. We want to serve. We want to give back. And I think we oftentimes find ourselves in these situations. It's like, well, I'm giving you what you wanted. Why am I not getting what I wanted? And then that is the pattern that needs to break, is that we actually have to get rooted in who we are first, in a whole sense, before I can even give you anything. Because actually what I'm giving you is a manipulation. And it's so hard to hear those things at the deeper root piece of it. But when we start to look back at the story, and that I can see that this is my opportunity, that I don't have to hold guilt or shame around the fact that this isn't going the way that I want it to, that I might need help. And I might need to ask for help from people that actually know what they're talking about. Because there's a lot of people out there that don't know what they're talking about. There's a lot of coaches out there that they're trying to make a quick buck. They don't know what they're doing. Like, and it's not all of them, but there's a lot of them. And then I think we're in a phase of society now where they're going to start to filter out, that authenticity is really going to start to come out. And you might not resonate, like this might be the greatest time of your life. But if you can start to change the story of that and recognize that this is my opportunity to make something of myself, because if you've broken everything, that's actually one of the most amazing places to be, because you get a fresh start, and
yes.
you can start anytime. Like it drives me crazy when if somebody's like, well, half my life's already gone. I didn't utilize my 20s well. That I don't care. Like you can always restart. Like that is the thing that you always have the ability within your control, is to restart. Get after it. Go do something. Small shifts over a period of time. Tony Robbins said this at one of the conferences I went to that it changed everything for me. Was he says most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and they underestimate what they can do with 10. And I'm a complete testament to that if you take those small actions, like you were talking about earlier with the self-discipline book, and, you're working out and you're reading, you're inside this small little room in complete, utter pain. But instead of succumbing to the comforts of drinking more or, diving more into things that were only going to, mess with your biology, your hormones, like the dopamine responses that are going to show up for you, you actually decided to make these small actionable steps. And then over a period of time, like that delayed gratification, what it did is it compounded, so that you're having this conversation with me here where we're actively trying to show other men that have gone through bad divorces or have had custody battles or have gone through, like I truly see the most screwed up stories as the most beautiful stories, because there's so much opportunity for them to actually, like, who cares? Like, I can think about people that they maybe they've had a couple small things that were hard come up in their life, but really their life wasn't that hard. Like, I don't get excited about that. Like, I don't get excited about, like, all right, I want to know. I think when we look back at scars as men, and you go back into the times when we were actually, there's some men that are still in the military now, but when you were actually, we were designed for war. Like, when you look at it from a biological perspective, when you look back at what that looked like, that the men that carried the biggest scars were the ones that were respected the most, because they had made it through the battles and they were battle tested. So they knew what they're up against. Well, we don't have that same thing in society today in the same sense, because it's safer, but the emotional pieces, those are the pieces that carry the most respect for me. That if you've gone through something really challenging and then you made something out of it, that's remarkable. Like I have so much respect for that, because what that signals to me is that you're a man that I would want on the front lines with me, next to me, because I know you can do it. That you're capable of overcoming whatever the challenge is that we're facing in that moment, because it's not about knowing what to do. It's just about knowing I can overcome it and I'll figure it out. And that's what being a man is.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. And, the custody battle, number one, dude, divorce and custody battle sucks.
Terrible.
It sucks, dude. It's horrible. Like I told you, my divorce lasted a year. My custody battle lasted almost 4 years. And I filed bankruptcy after it, lost my house, everything. My name was gone through the mud. Lost friends, lost, pretty much everything. And looking back, it was one of the best things that ever happened, because I had 2 little kids who were going to need their dad. And I'm telling you, the way I parent now, the way that I have a relationship with my kids now is different than it would have been. I am able to be there for them differently because what I went through, right? And if you think, like, what, going through yours, what would have happened to your kids if you had stayed the broken version of yourself?
Yeah, they would have been spoiled little brats, in a sense, because I wouldn't have had the strength to confront their mothers. So, like, I went through 2 different custody battles, and that was, it was just like getting kicked in the nuts over and over again with the different situations that I went through, because it stretched out probably about the same, about 4 years with 2 different situations. And, I look back with I have such great relationships with my kids right now, like, where they actually, unfortunately, they're still all under 12, but they know the story because their moms didn't really keep that. And so I've had to deal with stories I didn't think I would have to deal with until they were older. Now, and, the relationships I have, especially with my daughters, is incredible, because they look at me now and they're like, that we know that's not you anymore. And I wouldn't have had the ability to tell their moms no. And so that they would have been the leaders of their parenting. And I don't think that's what we're called to as men. Like, I understand why guys, why they let, like, I totally understand why a man would leave his kids, because moms can make it really difficult through that process, and they have a lot of leverage inside the system. And so, like, for some guys, the weight is just too much, and they don't have the ability to be there for their kids and to show up in that way, where you can say, you know what, no, this doesn't work for them. I see what needs to be done for them, because as our jobs as fathers is to frame and protect for our children. And that means that we have to see something outside of ourselves so that they can fall and bump their knee, and they can make mistakes along the way, but we're still there as padding so they don't totally crash and break their jaw. So being able to have the strength to, because most guys, we may be able to do that within our profession, but at home, or in a situation like you and I are in, that is so much more difficult. And and to be able to say no, like I can't imagine what my kids would be like today, because my discipline for them now is probably the only thing that holds them together at this point, because, you know, when we look at the dynamics between men and women, if women operate mostly out of emotion and they're designed that way, then they're not always looking at it from a longer perspective. They're thinking about it in the moment. And so they're thinking about safety. They're thinking about what is best in this particular moment. And sometimes that's giving into the kid to give them something to shut them up. And if you're constantly just shutting them up by giving them what they want, they're never actually going to learn anything. And that's our job as fathers, is to be like, no, this is going to be painful right now, but I promise you, I'm going to be here with you along the way, and we're going to lead you into, becoming a version. Like, I don't, there's very few things I get upset with my kids about, but the things that, because I want them to I don't ever want to try to shape who they think who I think they need to be, but I want them to really step into their authenticity. My oldest daughter, she loves nails and makeup and all of these like cosmetic things. I don't really love it. I don't know, but I'm not gonna tell her this isn't. She's very artistic with it, so I'm gonna lean into that artistic piece. But I also need you to know that, like, when Dad says something, I need you to listen, because I'm trying to keep you safe. And so we have these conversations around, well, why is it important to listen to Dad? So they understand in the moment when I'm like, don't do that. It's not, well, don't do it just because I say I don't do it. They already have the knowledge base beforehand. Oh, Dad's saying this because he sees something that's unsafe and I need to listen. And I'll ask them afterwards, why is it important to listen to Dad in the moment? Dad, you're trying to keep us safe. And so they have that understanding. But back then I wouldn't have known how to do that. And I don't know what my kids would look like today. Mm-hmm. Like, it would be, it's already hard enough for them now that they're split between multiple homes, and there's a lot of like shuffling that goes around. But for me, I've turned it into this thing of like, all right, you guys already have a story. Like, you guys are already going through something, and I use it for them, even though they might not understand it at the time. They'll understand the lesson later, hopefully. I have to have that hope. Yeah. But it's a lot.
Man, yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so diving into helping men, because, essentially that's kind of what you're doing now, and you're using your experience to help those, like we've talked about. What is becoming, I guess, what is becoming the best version of yourself? What does that actually require? What would you tell people that, what does that actually cost them? What does it require to do?
It's not for the weak. Like, if you want a magic pill, like, it's not there. It doesn't exist. Like, even within my program, like, we give you the framework, we give you the process, we give you the tools, so we make it easier. We map it out for you, but it takes real work. It costs everything. But what I can say is that on the other side of it, you can't even imagine what it would actually be, the experience, that version of yourself. So, I think a lot of the times we're driven by pain in the things that we do. So most people don't make changes until they're in so much pain. And that was me. You're in so much pain that you have to do something about it. But if you really want to, people don't really, men don't realize how much it's going to cost them, or the things that they're seeing. Like, I'm not so arrogant to think that I still don't need help now. It's just that I'm at a different understanding than most, but I still need mentorship, which is why I still seek it, Sure. And so, like, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, if you're not willing, I tell the guys that come into my program and my, the breakthroughs that we do, that, if you're not investing in me, you're investing in yourself. Like, this is an investment in you. Like, every major breakthrough I ever had was an investment. And I invested because that held me accountable to the commitments I was making. There's a lot of free stuff that's out there. YouTube's free, man. Like, you can learn so much on YouTube. there's very few people that are actually going to have major breakthroughs through YouTube. And because it's the way that it's designed, you're not actually being held, I would call it energetically accountable. And so you have to be willing to risk everything to become that version of yourself. And it can be there's all these different areas of our life that we can do that in. Usually people are focused on one thing where it's like they're only focused on the relationship piece, or they're only focused on the money piece, or they're only on the physical fitness piece. But if you really go to the core root of it, if you start to invest in yourself, the biggest and greatest investment that you can make is in your own personal development. And if you can go
Yes,
to the
100%.
core of what is happening for you, and you can start to work on those pieces, everything else around you, the physical fitness piece, the relationship piece, the money piece, the purpose, the mission, the vision, all those pieces will start to fall into place because you start to become a whole person. And that process, what I found was, how do I go back to the old story? And very specifically for me, I was 10, I grew up, struggling in school and believing I wasn't a smart individual. And then at 10, losing my best friend to another, he found another friend. And, I talk about it now and I'm like, it wasn't a big deal. I was 10 years old, right? I had no idea that particular story had set me up for decades of pain.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I didn't
absolutely.
go back into that story until everything started to shift. And there's a process to doing that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The first part of my program is called Unpacking the Past, and it's literally going back and you're thinking back of defining moments that, whether you think it was defining or not, something shifted your thinking, something changed your identity, the way that you think. And from that point, you've told lies to yourself. And what we have to do is we have to find those areas. Then we have to break the pattern, and you have to start replacing those lies with truths. And then you start on this truth process of, okay, I am who I am because this guy did this to me. No, you are who you are because blank, whatever your new truth is, and no, that's really good. So we've talked a lot about, what breakthrough can look like, what you can achieve. What would you say is the cost of staying the same?
Not worth it, man. I think the cost of regret, I think when you look back when you're 80, 90, you're going to look back and you're going to be miserable. Like I think the cost the cost of discipline is momentary. The cost of regret is forever. And if you can't understand the cost of staying the same, that if you stay the same, you actually get worse over time because you start to get rooted into those stories. The subconscious is a funny thing. 85% of our decision making is based upon our subconscious. We make 35,000 decisions a day. And if our subconscious is being rooted like on our neural pathways, because as we get older, our neural pathways get harder and harder to break. And so as we get older, if that story gets more solidified, then you're going to find yourself in a story that's alone. You're going to feel alone at the end of it all. And I don't think anybody feels fulfilled ever being alone. And in that loneliness, even in the beginning in Genesis, this is, it's not right for man to be alone. That's what created Eve. Yep. And you're going to find yourself, you might be surrounded by people, but people aren't going to know you. They're not going to see you. They're not going to understand you. And you're going to end your life looking back, wishing like something was different. And when I look at it like that, when I look at like, I'm confronting these challenges, I'm like risking everything. But what other option do I have? I have to be in that place of like, I have to risk this because, if I was to make a choice to, I talk a lot about fear versus love in my program. And most people are operating out of a sense of fear that if I was to be rejected in this moment, then I'm going to feel less than. And that when we start to see that and I look back at my own custody battle, all of the decisions that made it worse were based out of fear. And I didn't realize how responsible I was till in the last couple of years, that even after the custody battles, how I would be very petty about things, about my kids. I was hurting my kids along the way because of choice. Well, this is a boundary of mine. She can't talk to me this way, or she can't do this. And that actually, that was out of a place of fear. And that when I let go of that fear, all of those problems, like, oh, well, we'll see if this actually happens. And it doesn't. And then when I started to realize that,
Right.
that was like, oh, okay, this is that moment. Like if I lean more into, the love of what is happening and away from the fear, then I actually start to get more of what I want. So what's interesting about fear is the more you lean into the fear of it, the more you create the reality of the fear you're trying to avoid.
Yes.
But the more you lean into the risk of loving out of it, the more you actually get what you're looking for. And it's an incredible, it's simple to say that, but to do it, you have to connect your mind, your heart, and your body all together. And you have to go through a process.
Yeah.
And most people aren't willing to pay that cost because it's expensive.
Yeah. It's good. 100% though. Absolutely. Well, so for people who are listening, maybe, a man who's kind of on the edge of change, what's your word to him?
Don't quit. I think if you can go to the core of everything, it doesn't matter if you have the right program. It doesn't matter if you have the right process or whatever you're doing, just don't quit. Do something small. Start somewhere. And, the longer we wait to do something, decisions are made in a moment. You just have to make that same decision over and over again for it to become something consistent in your life. And so you could wait 10 years to make a decision that's going to change your life. But in the moment, if you make those decisions consistently, like you just have to make one, and then one turns into two turns into three, and it compounds over time. And then you look back and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I'm a different version. I don't sit here today in front of you, Jason, being like, oh, like, it was like, boom, I knew I was going to be here talking with you and I was going to have these stories, this understanding or this knowledge. No. I look back and I'm like, I can't believe I'm here because of all the small decisions I made. And then then you have this realization, like, a guy that's going in the gym, he's overweight, he gets a personal trainer, he starts doing a diet, he starts making those small incremental, you can see a massive amount of change in 3 months. He couldn't see it in the beginning phase of it. The stuff we're talking about, sometimes that takes years. Sometimes it takes decades. You just have to not quit. Yeah. And if you just don't quit, then I guarantee you that you're going to come out that version of yourself. You just have to listen to your intuition along the way. And that's really hard for us to do as men, because we want to be right, because holds us into this place of, okay, it's not going to fragment my ego. And humility and not quitting, like, those are superpowers. When you start to dial those two things in, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, 100%, man. Absolutely. Now, if you had told me that I was going to be sitting here having a podcast this time last year, I would have been like, absolutely not. I was not vulnerable with myself at all. And it's like, because I always thought that I was disqualified from anything good because of my past. And it wasn't until I shifted and turned that around and said, no, because of my past, I'm qualified to help others. I'm qualified. If I just lean into that and am vulnerable and tell others about it, it's actually my strength that I can build on. And it's all about rewiring it, flipping the script. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I could literally keep this going all day, but I know that we both got stuff to do. And, I thank you so much for being with us and your valuable words and, dude, your friendship, just you as a person. I'm very, very grateful for you. Obviously, you got a great program. If people are in the Massachusetts area, definitely check them out. How do people get a hold of you if they want to connect?
I'm on Instagram. My handle's Tony J. Bova. My website's TonyJBova.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Tony J. Bova. Everything's Tony J. Bova. So if you type in, just that phrase, you'll find me. I got my podcast. It's a solo podcast. It's on YouTube, Spotify. I drop a lot of, guys that want to talk about the root stuff, like some deeper stuff. That's where my podcast, I talk about these lessons and I give tips and tricks that I learned along the way there. If they want to, listen along there, that's that stuff is, it's invaluable. These lessons, and I will say this to you, Jason, is like when you didn't think you had anything to offer, right? Who would have ever imagined that it was actually the greatest thing you had to offer? And, you seeing that now, man, that's incredible, because you have a lot to offer a lot of guys out there that are in this struggle, in this place that, man, it feels as though there's no hope to come out on the other side of it. And that's actually false. You actually have more to offer because of that story. And that's the beauty that I see, that I love talking about, especially with, guys like you that have had that story. So it's been incredible, man, meeting you and chatting and then connecting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. And I'll put all of your links in the show notes. And for anybody listening, Tony is actually a rare podcast I actually do. I listen to your stuff. And you're kind of becoming a mentor of mine. I really appreciate it. So it's been an honor to talk with you. So definitely go check out his podcast, check out all of his websites, his programs, and just hit him up and say, hey, he's a nice guy.
Right.
So, all right, Tony, thank you so much, man. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and definitely look forward to talking with you more.
Absolutely, Jason. Been an honor. Thank you.
Take care, brother. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed today's guest. And I just wanted to say that if this has made you think, if this has sparked something in you, maybe about your purpose or your relationship with God, I just want to encourage you to not let that moment pass. If you're ready to take that next step and connect with me personally, you can reach out to me through my email, which is jason@rebuiltlifecoach.com, or you can go to my website at www.rebuiltlifecoach.com. And if you're serious about building a stronger, faith-driven life, please go check out that program. Thank you for listening, and as always, keep walking in purpose and growing in faith. I'll catch you next time.